Hi, folks. This is Mark by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D. for the Institute for Dialectical Meta-Realism. You know, when you're having a really bad podcasting day, when you go back and listen to the first recording of your podcast and you find one mistake after another. That's what just happened to me. So I will try to be more careful so I don't do it again. I mean, one mistake, I can put a correction in the comments section or in the announcement section, whatever that is directly below the video. But I had a lot of mistakes. And so for that reason, I decided to just go ahead, discard the MP4 file, and start all over again. Okay, let me remind you that I do have this bottle of cola here, and that is because of one of the meds I take for my autism, mirtazapine, which is also known by the brand name Remeron. It's a lousy brand name, isn't it? Remeron? Why? Who came up with the name Remeron? Anyway, um, this is basically a necessity for me, I decided, because my mouth kept on drying out, and I would get to a point where talking became somewhat painful, and I would have to control my voice so I didn't lose it. So I thought to myself, why am I doing these podcasts? I am doing these podcasts because I enjoy them, but secondarily, because I want to communicate to other people. Well, maybe I have the order of that reversed. Maybe primarily to communicate and secondarily because I enjoy them. Either way, the communication part is messed up by not having enough liquid in my mouth. And the enjoyment of it is also messed up by not having enough liquid in my mouth. So to resolve that, I said, what the heck? I will keep this trusty bottle of cola here. And so when I need it, I will simply avail myself of it. So I apologize in advance. Now, on to this particular podcast. This is actually part two. Uh, if you have not watched part one, which is the previous podcast to this one, my suggestion is that you shut this podcast down on YouTube and watch part one, the one right before it. Uh, Now, you might be able to understand it from just watching this one, but it might also be somewhat confusing. So I think watching part one first would be easier and would make more logical sense. Then you can come back and watch this one, where I take basically what I said before and I apply it to Israel and Palestine. I think that would be the most sensible thing to do, but obviously you can do whatever you like. If you can make sense out of this one without doing that, then good luck to you and God bless you, as my mother would say all the time. God bless you. God bless you. She would say it constantly, constantly. Okay, in any event, we talked about intersectional Marxism last time. My proposal was that intersectional Marxism could be seen as a very important part of Maoism third worldism. Unfortunately, most people, when they think of intersectionality, they think of the original intersectionality, which was developed by the law professor Kimberly Crenshaw and by the retired professor emeritus Patricia Hill Collins, which was not a strictly Marxist proposal. It was arguably leftist or left-ish. I don't really know which of those terms to apply to it, but it was not Marxist for a reason that I will explain in just a bit. But this new proposal, which is really my own, but it is based to some extent on the intersectional Marxism of Ashley Bower, is Marxist. And so it is possible to take intersectionality and develop it in a more Marxian direction. And that is what Ashley Bower tried to do. And that is what I'm trying to do as well. You can modify it. I watched a video of Kimberly Crenshaw a while back. This is back before I retired. I actually showed the video to my students, and they seemed to like it, maybe. I'm not sure. They seemed to like it. In that video, what Kimberly Crenshaw said is that to her, intersectionality was a model, not a theory. In other words, you could take intersectionality and develop it in many different theoretical directions, including Marxist, perhaps anarchist, perhaps post-structuralist. I don't know what else, but there are a lot of different ways in which the intersectionality of Kimberly Crenshaw and Patricia Hill Collins could be applied. And so some of those applications, as I said, have been Marxist, but most people, when they think of intersectionality, don't think of that. Or when they think of intersectionality, they think of it as a theory. But as Crenshaw clearly said, it was not, in her view, a theory. It was a model. And therefore, different people, a lot of different people, have developed a variety of theories based on the model originated, or at least modified by Kimberly Crenshaw. What is intersectionality again, to review what I talked about last time? Intersectionality, as I define it, which is not the same as Kimberly Crenshaw defined it, is identical to the capitalist world system. There is literally no difference between them. Now, what Kimberly Crenshaw said, just to make the clear distinction, is something quite different. Kimberly Crenshaw came up with this triad, which has been expanded into other structures as well, but the triad of race, class, and gender. And she put them on kind of a level playing field. And so her idea was that when you're looking at a society, when you want to see who has the upper hand in a society, say on a particular intersection, let's say on gender, well, clearly men have the upper hand on that intersection, right? Men have more power. Men make more money overall. If you look at the billionaires in the United States, the vast majority of them are men. If you look at the CEOs in the United States, the vast majority of them are also men. And so when it comes to that, men have the upper hand in terms of intersectionality as it was conceived of by Kimberly Crenshaw and Patricia Hill Collins, not by me. Okay. My objection to that is as follows. I don't like the fact that Crenshaw and Collins have said, well, class is like race and gender, so we can consider them all as being intersections in this thing called intersectionality. No, because it is not. From a Marxist point of view, it is not. As a Marxist, I would say that you cannot put class on the same level as race and gender. Class is intersectionality. Race and gender can be seen as two of its many intersections or contradictions. So we might talk about the various intersections of the capitalist world system, or intersectionality, as the contradictions of capitalism. So it's a very useful tool if approached in the right way. In other words, throw out the intersectionality of Crenshaw and Collins. Well, literally throw it out. You can read about it, but rely upon a new approach to intersectionality, one which redefines intersectionality as class or the capitalist world system. That is what I do, and I think that makes much more sense than the approach which was originally developed. Okay, so that's basically my own view. Now, we talked last time about the US and Mexico as an illustration of how intersectional Marxism could be applied. Today, I'm going to move on to a different subject. So this is basically part 2 of the podcast that I started before. That different subject is Palestine and Israel. If you look at the different intersections within the intersectionality that lies within Palestine and Israel, you can see that there is literally virtually no comparison between them. Take, for example, education. Which place is more educated? Obviously, it is Israel. There are a lot of universities in Israel. I don't know if there are any in Gaza, maybe, but certainly not as many as there are in Israel. So you're going to find a lot more well-educated people in Israel than you will find in Palestine. Take occupational status, same kind of thing. There are going to be a lot more people with high-ranked occupations like professors, medical doctors, attorneys, engineers, and so on in Israel than there will be in Palestine. So when it comes to that particular issue as well, Israel once again has the upper hand. The bulk of the major benefits go to Israel, not to Palestine. So on those two intersections, we can see that Israel, not Palestine, is the primary beneficiary. But we can even go beyond that and talk about some things that are not emphasized that much by Collins and Crenshaw. Let's take, for example, ethnicity. Obviously, in Israel, you have multiple ethnicities. There are even some Arabs in Israel. There are some Druzes in Israel, and there are different Jewish ethnicities in Israel as well. The same thing is true in Palestine. You have different ethnicities in Palestine, primarily Muslims, but also Christians and Jews. But when you compare the ethnicities in Israel with the ethnicities in Palestine, which one of those has the most power and privilege? Well, clearly, it is Israel. Israel has the most power and privilege with respect to virtually everything, opportunity, anything you can basically name. Israel is a first world country. Palestine can be thought of as the subaltern, as that term was used by Antonio Gramsci, meaning the dispossessed, the marginalized, the othered people of the world. Palestine can be thought of in that sense as being a third world region of the world. Israel is a first world region of the world. And so there you see how I take intersectional Marxism and Maoism, third worldism, and combine them together in relationship to the situation between Palestine and Israel. It is very easy to do, and I think it is also very beneficial because you can take specific intersections, not just talk about capitalism in general, which is fine to do as well, but talk about specific things like education, like income, like occupational status, etc., and then examine them in relationship to one place and the other. And you will find that inevitably Israel will always come out on top. And as long as Israel remains in control, controls the access that Palestine has to basically everything from electricity to other kinds of things like power supplies and water, and I don't know. I can't even think of all the things that Israel controls. But basically, anything that Palestine has is at the behest of Israel. So Israel controls Palestine, and Israel is a first world country. So, as a Maoist third worldist, obviously, my focus is on the third world, not on the first world. Why? Well, Israel is a beneficiary of capitalism. And so, is it likely that Israel will abandon capitalism for socialism or communism? I mean, I can't predict the future, but I would say I don't think it is likely. I mean, why would it? Why would a country, an imperialist country like Israel, basically an extension of the US, want to make a change when Israel is already doing well under the present system? But when you look at the subaltern, in this case, Palestine, including Gaza, which is an oppressed nation, not an imperialistic nation, an oppressed area, a subaltern area of the world, would have a lot to gain by shifting from capitalism to socialism. And for that reason, it makes sense to think of Maoism, third worldism, as communism or socialism beginning in places like Palestine, not in places like Israel. I hope that makes some sense. That is the way in which I conceive of Maoism, third worldism from at least one perspective. And so I think that combining Maoism, third worldism with intersectional Marxism can be very beneficial. But again, the problem is that people who look at intersectionality tend to focus on the non-Marxist intersectionality of Crenshaw and Collins, not realizing that there are actually many, many, many different schools of intersectionality among academics, which there are. I gave you one, which is different than generic intersectionality. Now, when I would teach social problems in my social problems classes, the textbook I used, the primary textbook, was a book called Race, Class, and Gender. And the senior author was Patricia Hill Collins. So it was not a Marxist textbook. So what I had to do is I would have to go back and look at the articles and reinterpret them from an intersectional Marxist lens. And I would first explain what Collins was doing, and then I would talk about its defectiveness and why it had that defectiveness in one or more areas. And then I would propose my own solution as an improvement over intersectionality as it was proposed by Patricia Hill Collins. And that seemed to work. So, intersectional Marxism is not the only other part of dialectical metarealism besides Maoism third worldism. There are others as well, and I have discussed all of them in a recent podcast, but I think it makes sense to delve into each one of those aspects individually, as we have in the last podcast and this podcast delved into intersectional Marxism. Intersectional Marxism presents, in my view, a wonderful opportunity for expanding Maoism third worldism and for broadening its appeal, for broadening its coverage to not only talk about capitalism and imperialism, but to break capitalism and imperialism down into individual intersections or thoroughfares. I think that makes it a much more comprehensive perspective. For the time being, this has been Mark by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D., for the Institute for Dialectical Metarealism. Have a pleasant day and an even better day tomorrow.